Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show. Yeah, as always, we really appreciate you guys tuning in and excited to dive into some listener Q&A today.
Yeah, so we haven't done a Q&A episode in a long time, and so put out a little call for questions plus some questions we'd received via DMs and emails, so compiled some of those together to hopefully give you guys an exciting and interesting episode. And just before we dive into it, if you guys do have any questions for us or any questions you ever want us to answer, feel free to just send us a message on Instagram or Facebook. It's at the World Wanderers podcast or info@theworldwanderers.com. You can always email us and send us a question. These episodes are always really fun to do, and we haven't done one for ages. So maybe we can start making it a more frequent occurrence.
For sure. Yeah. Should we dive in?
Yeah. So the first question is, how do you balance cooking versus eating out while traveling? And I feel like this is a really interesting question because I think for us, it kind of is different depending on what type of trip we're doing. So if we're doing something that's more of like a long weekend getaway somewhere, a like week-long vacation style trip, or something that's more of like 1+ months more nomad style. So maybe let's start if we're going somewhere for like a long weekend. What does it look like for us?
Yeah, I'd say like 90% eating out. I guess our typical style, like if we're going for a weekend and we're staying at an Airbnb, would be maybe like cook breakfast in 1 or 2 days and then mostly eat all of our other meals out.
Yeah, in general, we like to book into Airbnbs. I think recently we've stayed in more hotels, but I feel like that's more like 1 night, 2 nights, anything kind of longer than that. In general, we like to get an Airbnb, and we always look for Airbnbs that have kitchens in them. And then we will at least buy snacks, because I think that when we're eating out in general, we often don't eat like 3 large meals out. So we'll either try to like cook breakfast and then go out for 2 meals, or maybe do like a big brunch and then a dinner and have something like light in between, like snack type thing, or, you know, buy some ingredients to cook something. But yeah, would definitely say if we're doing like a weekend or a long weekend, part of the experience for us is going out and eating. And so, you know, we really only have so many restaurants that we can eat at in that time period. So we're going to try to eat at as many as we can. And then what about those like maybe a week-long vacation style trip? I know we've done this in Panama a number of years ago. We just did a trip to PV with vacation style. We did Costa Rica vacation style.
Yeah, I think not a lot changes. I think probably like the differentiation would be when we are staying kind of like we did that Medellin trip, going somewhere for like 3 weeks, longer. I think if it's like kind of a week and it's more vacation style, we're still eating out the heavy majority. But when we are staying somewhere like a few weeks, that's I think when we're cooking a little bit more. So like when we were in Medellin for almost a month in an Airbnb with the kitchen there, that one was probably what, like
50-50?
Yeah, close to that. Like between lunches and dinners, most breakfasts at home, between lunches and dinners, probably like 1 of those a day at home was kind of what the thing we're aiming for. Sometimes it was less, probably a few nights in a row it was more, but about that type of thing. And then obviously this changes a little bit depending on where you are. So we spent so much time over the past couple of years in places where it's really affordable to eat. Like I know traveling Southeast Asia, lots of places in Latin America, like if you go to the grocery store and start getting stuff, it's like, yeah, it's affordable. But if you're shopping kind of like you would in Canada, buying like, you know, some of those importer products, you kind of get the sense of like, it might just be cheaper for me to order in food. So like if we're going to the States, we're going to be cooking our own meals more often. And if, for example, if we went to Europe, we'd be looking at doing that. But just because kind of where we've been, it's lended itself as well to a higher percentage of eating out / ordering in.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good differentiation too, is that we do order in quite a bit. And, you know, so it doesn't always look like going out, but we're ordering Uber Eats or Rappi. So we're having a meal that's delivered to us, but we're not always going out. And this is especially shifted quite a bit with having the baby, just because we're on her schedule quite a bit and stuff like that. But I also think the location thing is important. And I think looking up where you're going and seeing what the cost of food is. And I think the States is a really great example versus Mexico, somewhere where we are not going to say we're going for a week. We are not going to eat 90% of our meals out. I think it's going to be like one meal a day, and we'll go and do like a big grocery shop. And it's not really affordable the way it is here to order our groceries online. So one of the things we look for when we look for an Airbnb or accommodation is like, are we in walking distance, ideally, or like a quick Uber from a pretty major grocery store? So yeah, I think definitely planning based on your budget, how much things are going to cost in the place that you're going. But I think for us, like a big part of travel and nomad life and living abroad has been the food. I mean, one of the things that we love about living in Mexico is the food. And so I think getting to experience new restaurants, eating at places we like, supporting the local economy in that way has been something that's been important to us and continues to be important to us.
Yeah, I think too, with just like the way budgeting works, like we often end up staying in like a smaller apartment. And so once you start cooking in there, it's making a big mess. You don't like, especially with balancing work too. You're in the apartment, you're working all day, you cook. Like there's a really nice feeling of like getting out, going walking somewhere, sitting down. We're a little bit more present. And so all those things beyond budget that make it feel like it's worthwhile. And I think we both love, eating good food, experiencing, like finding new restaurants, kind of being out and about in like a community where you're seeing lots of different people. And so for us, that's a big part of travel. And I think one of the reasons we do look to travel to places where the costs are lower than they are in Canada, the States, Europe, is that feeling of like, yeah, we can go out and eat dinner like most nights if we want to, is something we look for. Not that we don't like cooking, but just for us when we're traveling, that's something we like to do.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say about this is that kind of leaning into like the different rhythms. Like I feel like, we have cravings for different things and sort of different chapters and cycles of life. And I think that one thing that we've noticed is that we go through these different periods of time. Like say we're traveling continuously quite a bit and we're eating out quite a bit. We'll feel like the desire to settle down. And so that'll be like, hey, let's get an apartment in a city for maybe 3 months instead of 1 month, or maybe even 6 months. And let's do things like invest in a good frying pan or invest in an Instant Pot. And let's like make a concerted effort to cook the majority of our food and get back into things like going to the gym, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that there's kind of these like cycles that happen also. And I think we just kind of lean into that and trust that if we're in a big period of eating out quite a bit, at some point we're going to be craving more of that like home cooked, eat at home, lighter food, and just kind of going with the flow with that a little bit. We haven't had that as much over the last year because we have been more stable. So I think we've been cooking probably like the majority of our food over the last little bit. And that's really nice. But I also feel like when we go places like our trip that we just did to Panama and Medellin, it was really nice to be going out more and trying new restaurants and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. So the next question that we received is, did you feel safe in Medellin? And the person asked, especially walking around in the evenings and in the Poblado area. And so the first thing I'll say with this is that we do have an entire episode on Colombia. It's one of the recent episodes that we released, and we talk quite in depth with this. But I think the short answer for this is yes, we felt really pleasantly surprised with everything in Medellin. The entire vibe was really great, and I don't think we at any point felt unsafe at all.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is, I think when you're going in travel circles, there's a lot of like feeling safe, feeling unsafe, which I think has like some value, but isn't necessarily like the best metric like for your actual safety or not. Like I know there's quite a few like legitimate safety concerns in Medellin, especially in evenings, especially in like bars and clubs and that type of thing. When you're in those spaces around strangers, we're like, more family oriented now. So we're out more in the day, not staying out late, not doing those types of things, which leads itself to feeling a little bit safer and to being a little bit safer. So I think we both felt like really comfortable, not very many sketchy people around, especially in those areas. And so like walking around, everyone's was super friendly, a lot of like exchanging like hellos with people. And so, yeah, didn't get a sense of like unsafety. or safety concerns at all. But I do think kind of that bigger point with traveling of like on November 1st, the turkey feels really safe. And sometimes when you're traveling, you like nothing happens, you feel safer and safer, but you're actually more and more in danger. And so I think there are legitimate safety concerns in Medellin specifically, Colombia generally, most places generally, especially at night. But for us, like when we went out in the evenings, we were never really out past like 10 p.m. And
I mean, let's be real, we weren't out past like 8 p.m.
Yeah, but like we were probably out like to 9 something at least one night.
Maybe.
But walking around, pretty busy area. So there's lots of people around, not very many sketchy people around. And so just from like our perception, it didn't seem like there was a particularly like a high risk of being mugged in that area, that zone that we were staying in. But I'm sure like once you get into like the 1 a.m.s, 2 a.m.s, and maybe in some other zones of the city, that's not the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I would always advise taking safety precautions. I mean, if you were traveling solo, I think that makes you at higher risk for all this type of stuff. I mean, we were together, I think basically all the time. I wasn't ever really, really alone, and I wasn't really ever alone with the baby. And again, we weren't out in the middle of the night. I think if you're alone and maybe you've been out drinking and it's 3 a.m., that puts you in a more vulnerable situation. So I think this taking safety precautions, maybe not getting in those situations, or if you do want to do that, just knowing that maybe taking an Uber instead of walking might be like the better option for you, et cetera, et cetera. We took general safety precautions in Medellin though, like our passports were kept safe in our apartments where we were staying. You know, we didn't really walk around with a lot of valuables. In general, we don't have like a lot of flashy things. We're not ever out like waving around our cell phones or anything like that. And then the other thing we do is we never keep all of our cash in our wallets, just in case purses do get stolen or wallets get stolen or muggings do happen. So always making sure that you've got cards and cash kind of separated so that if somebody does steal your stuff, it's not going to be like the end of the world. You've still got some cards, some money, maybe in a form of identification, that type of thing. So I think that just taking those general safety precautions is something that I would definitely advise. And I would advise that for most places in the world. But in general, I think we did feel, you know, quite safe and whatnot in Medellin. We had a really pleasant trip, and you can hear more about that in that episode that we did.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for us so we'd been there before and kind of had a general sense of things. Going into it had probably like more people bringing this up. I don't know if there's like the narrative's changing or what the deal is, but I think we felt safer while we were there than the questions, concerns, and thoughts kind of beforehand. But that said, you know, you never really know if you're just getting lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like a lot of those things are just like wrong place, wrong time. So it is important to take precautions because, you know, bad things can happen anywhere. All right, the next question is, what is the cost of living in Mexico? I feel like this question is a really hard one to answer because it's going to be really different depending on where you decide to live in Mexico. I think comparison that I can make is like when we lived in Puerto Vallarta, for example, we were paying about $1,200 USD for a 1-bedroom apartment in a really nice area of town with a small ocean view, a sizable 1-bedroom apartment, but still 1-bedroom apartment. And here in Querétaro, we pay pretty similar for a 3-bedroom house with a backyard in like a private community with like a pool and a gym, also in a really nice area. So that just gives you the sense of like a city that's more local versus a city that's more touristy and the difference in demand. So we have like at least twice the amount of space in this house as we did in that apartment, probably like 2.5 times the space, plus a bigger outdoor space, plus amenities. So I feel like, you know, the bang for your buck is a lot better in a city like here than it is versus PV. Yet being in a city like PV offers a lot of benefits, you know, things like the beach. I mean, if you don't speak a lot of Spanish, it's great because there's a lot more English speaking there. It's more touristy if that's your vibe. If you're looking for more, you know, people from, you know, maybe the US or Canada or your home country, you're probably more likely to find them there. And then, yeah, like I said before, the beach. So if you're looking for a beach vibe, places like Puerto Vallarta and Playa del Carmen and Tulum are just going to be more expensive than some of the more like local inland places.
Yeah, I think you really hit on it. Varies a ton. Almost feel like you could be like, the cost of living in Mexico is whatever you want it to be. Like you could live really far out of the city in like, a not so nice small apartment and eat tamales and tacos and spend like, under $1,000 a month easy. That you can live in the center of Mexico City in a 2-bedroom apartment and eat out most nights and spend probably more than you're currently spending unless you live in New York.
Like 4,000 USD.
Yeah. I think in general, my sense, like in a totally non-scientific way, would be, it seems like 2 to 3 times like either the cost difference for the exact same thing or the quality difference for the exact same cost. So like if you were comparing living in like one of the nicer areas, like a kind of a hip area of Mexico City to like a hip area of New York City, like the rents in Mexico City are quite high, but they're at least double or more if you were in New York City. And kind of same thing, like if you're comparing PV to, I don't know, like
LA or San Diego.
Yeah, or like maybe San Diego or somewhere like a beach town in Florida. If you were looking at paying the exact same rent, you'd be looking at like a significantly nicer place to stay. And then you go to the bar, you go to the restaurants. Like if you go to a similar like quality place, usually the prices are going to be like 2 to 3 times lower for like a similar level of quality. Would be kind of like my rule of thumb right now. That said, the Mexican peso is like really strong. So like over the past year, the things in Mexico relative to US dollar prices have gotten higher or more expensive here, significantly more expensive compared to the Canadian dollar. Inflation's happening here. So I think kind of over time, we'll see that trend a little bit lower, like where the difference isn't so great, especially in like the nicest areas where there are people from other places in the world coming to Mexico.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think that you touched on something important there where you said like you can kind of spend what you want to spend, because even the prices we're spending is like we could be spending quite a bit in this city if we were living in a different area, maybe not in a private community. We could certainly be living in a smaller space. We have friends that pay like $500, $700 less per month than we pay. And, they have quite a bit less space and live in a less ideal area, but at least in our opinion, but you can spend less. And I remember when we lived in Mexico City back in 2017, we thought we were getting like an excellent deal on rent. Like I think we were paying about $1,000 Canadian, 750 USD a month for a small 1-bedroom apartment in Roma Norte, which is an amazing area of the city to be in. And I mean, this was like cutting down our cost of rent pretty significantly from Canada. And then we went to Merida and we were there with a friend, and our friend was moving into this like, I think 2-bedroom, two-story house that was like probably twice as big as our apartment. And I think he was paying like 400 USD or something like that. So he was paying like almost half of what we were paying. And I was like, oh, we are like definitely in the wrong city. And obviously prices have shifted quite a bit. They've gone up quite a bit over the last couple of years, just with inflation, demand, just the nature of the economy and stuff like that. But I think just looking at your budget and what you'd ideally like to pay, and then looking at what is a priority for you, like what amenities are the most important thing for you, even with like the fanciest apartment that you might want to live in Roma Norte, like Ryan said, if you're comparing this to like a major city in the US, you're still going to have a lower cost of living, but it's not going to be like cheap. Like you're not going to get a ballin' penthouse in Condesa for a cheap price. Like it is relatively expensive to live in that area, in that city at this time. So I think that narrowing down maybe a couple cities that you're kind of interested in because they are, related to your values, and then just doing a little bit of research on, areas you might want to live in, the cost there, and then deciding based on that. And while there was many reasons that we decided to live in Querétaro, I think cost of living and what we could get here relative to some of the other places we lived was definitely a factor for us.
Definitely.
Okay, next question is The next question is, what are the biggest downsides of raising a child in Mexico versus your home country? And I think that this is a really interesting question because, obviously, I think for us, we've identified more upsides than downsides. But I think the two major downsides that I would identify are, one, I do feel like there are more safety concerns in Mexico, and we do take more safety precautions, especially with having a child, than we would if we lived in Canada. And then two, I feel like the other downside for me is that we are just further away from family. If we lived in Canada, particularly Western Canada, we would be able to see, our families more, which I think would be really special for Lou. We're really lucky that our families are willing to come visit us here, and we get back to Canada once or twice a year to see them. But I do feel like that's a downside of being, living abroad.
Yeah, I think there's really honestly not too many downsides. Like, obviously we think the upsides outweigh the downsides, but like you said, those I think are the big ones. I think the safety thing, because when you have like a child that's under 2, like you're not letting them play alone really. It doesn't make itself as apparent. I think some of those downsides will probably start to be more apparent as she gets older, like those ages where you want your child to kind of like roam free, which obviously that's a concern in like lots of different cities in Canada and the States now, that is safety. But I think it's more apparent here, and that's more of a downside of like, and you're like 10 years old and you want to go like roam around on your bike by yourself. Not sure how we're going to feel about that here. And then distance from family, especially if family gets older. And then I think for me, like there's maybe that downside of like, we're second language speakers in this country, and kind of what's it going to look like when if our daughter is like kind of identifies Spanish as like the way she prefers to communicate. And there's like always a little bit of like, maybe lack of ease with us talking in Spanish. Like, could that be a downside as well? Those are things that come to mind for me.
Yeah. Or vice versa. If, she's speaking English at home and that's kind of her dominant language, like how does she navigate? I mean, one, she holds a Mexican passport, so she's a Mexican national. And, how does she navigate the world around her? We're hoping that she'll be like confident and fluent in both, but I think it's just definitely an uncertainty. I think similarly to that, one thing that I have thought about is just like, like what does she identify with culturally? And obviously we don't know what our long-term plans are, but I think that if you're born in the country that your parents are born in, so had she been born in Canada and our base was in Canada and we were in Canada for half the year, every year, then I think there'd be like, she'll identify as Canadian. But it's a little bit more tricky when it's like, we're living in Mexico. She is a Mexican national, but like, we're not Mexican and we're Canadian. She's also a Canadian citizen, but we don't spend that much time in Canada right now. So I definitely do think about that. Like, what are the downsides of being like, I guess like, I think they call them like third culture kids. Like, is that something that's going to impact her? And I know talking to a friend of mine who actually is American and Canadian, she's a dual citizen, but her family is originally from Mexico. So when she was growing up in Texas, she had a lot of influence from the Mexican side of her family. And she moved to Canada quite young. And she's like, I don't know if I want my daughter to have, to get her the second passport, because she can get her the US passport through birth. She's like, I don't know if I want to get her it quite yet, because she's like, I feel like I never really knew exactly where I fit. Like, I was never fully American. I've never been fully Mexican. And I was never really felt like fully Canadian. And she's like, I kind of just want her to like be Canadian. And obviously she can make that choice when she's bigger and stuff, but it's definitely something that gives you like food for thought in terms of like, what will this be like? But I kind of trust that we'll navigate that stuff as it comes and do what's best for her. But I think right in this moment, we've had a lot of conversations about just the opportunities here, the quality of life here. I think it gives us a lot of stuff that we wouldn't be able to get and give her in Canada, which definitely those upsides kind of outweigh the downsides.
Yep.
Okay, I think this is my favorite question we received, and we got this from our good friend Sasha. So shout out to Sasha for the best question on this list. He asked, what is your favorite taco?
I think for me, it's got to be taco, or an El Pastor taco would be my favorite.
Okay, that's mine too, but I feel like I need to give a caveat that it needs to be like a good al pastor with like a good trompo, because I don't want just like any al pastor where they've like maybe shaved the meat previously from a trompo like days and days earlier and they're just like heating it up in a frying pan. That's not my vibe. So I feel like a good al pastor taco. I feel like second to that would be like a really good shrimp taco, and then also a barbacoa taco. I feel like those are kind of my like close seconds. And if I was at a place that had al pastor on the menu, but they didn't have the trompo, which if you guys don't know, it's like the big spit with the meat on it that they rotate and cut it off, kind of donair style. If they didn't have that, but they had al pastor, I would order something else.
Yeah, I think that's about where I'm at. Tacos gobernador, which are like shrimp, but like in melted cheese, are a go-to for us. And then what was I going to say? Oh, tacos de canasta, which are kind of like soaked in like meat juice, are pretty tasty. But again, it's like you can have some good ones and you can have some bad ones. So those would be at the top of my list.
Okay, nice. Okay, next question has a couple of parts. So it says, what was it like getting set up in Mexico, from getting residency, deciding on Querétaro, getting your car down, and finding a place to live?
Yeah, I think this is basically, that would be like an hour-long episode, and I think it's stuff we've hit on in different episodes. So we're willing to point to those. But overall, it was like incredibly smooth. Like it was a gradual process for us. And kind of when we came here and got ourselves more set up full time, like we'd already spent a bunch of time in Mexico, knew a lot about how things worked. But then kind of there's so many different, like if you're in a city, normally there's a community and there's people who can help you navigate a lot of these things. So for us, like we worked with someone great going through the residency process when we first did it, and then that was more of a law firm, and then this person's more of just like I don't know, you call her like a fixer of some variety, just someone who can help you book appointments, translate documents, prepare things. Here in Querétaro, and she was helpful for like renewing our temporary residency, changing to permanent residency, all that stuff. And then kind of going through the car process. One, our drives were great, super fun, and enjoyed. Like on the way down, if you haven't listened to those episodes, we shipped our car to Utah because at that time you couldn't cross the US border in a car. And then drove from Utah to Querétaro. Last summer we drove from Querétaro back to Canada, sold our Canadian car, came back down here and bought a car here in Mexico, and that the whole process was like pretty darn smooth as well. And same finding a place to live. We actually kind of did it through our network, but again, like most communities have some great real estate agents and people who can help you kind of identify what are the best areas of town to live in, what are the different options, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, that was a really good, like succinct answer. And yeah, we do have podcast episodes on a lot of this stuff. But I think just to kind of add a couple of things to that, I feel like our like path with Mexico has happened really organically. Like when we came down back in 2017, I don't think either of us saw a future in which we were like permanent residents, living full time in Mexico, you know, owning a car, having a child who has Mexican citizenship. Like that was not at all on our radar. I think it was just we needed to be more settled than we had been previously in our nomad stuff. We wanted to be in a time zone that worked, and we felt like Mexico was a great option because we had 6 months on a tourist visa. It was on Central Standard Time. We'd heard great things about Mexico City. And then I think that as we discovered more of Mexico, we just got really like, I guess, kind of sucked into it and just fell in love with the people, the culture. We learned more and more Spanish. And I think that being more advanced, almost fluent Spanish speakers now has helped us a lot, I think, for this whole process. But another thing I'll add too is that one of the great things about Mexico is that there is a lot of people willing to assist with these types of services. So things like arriving and getting set up. Like there's an amazing real estate agent / house hunting company that we've used here in Querétaro, and she will like take you in her car from, you know, area to area, show you around the area and tour you through houses. She'll help you navigate like signing a contract in Spanish. She'll walk you through it all in English. And, those are the type of things that I think people don't realize, because they think like, oh, I'm going to move to this place. I don't speak the language. Maybe I'm going to get like taken advantage of. And there's a lot of people who are willing to help. There's a lot of people who offer services like this as a business, like even from things like we'll pick you up at the airport and we'll get you set up with like your first place to live until we get you into like a more permanent place. And the great thing is that these services are affordable. So you're not going to break the bank doing things like this. So we're big fans of stuff like that. But yeah, getting residency was something that kind of came from like, hey, Canada was going pretty crazy during the pandemic. We were actually like unable to fly back due to flight cancellations. We were on a tourist visa. Everywhere else was kind of closed. There was a lot of restrictions and we felt a little bit like trapped. And so we looked to see if temporary residency might be an option for us and decided to just go for it and apply. And that was one of the best decisions we've ever made. We did that back at the beginning of 2021. And then things have just kind of, I guess, snowballed from there in terms of like the more we set our life up here, we just decided to kind of stay. And then when we got pregnant, we decided to make the move to Querétaro. And part of that was like who we wanted to birth with. I really wanted to birth with a midwife and in either at home or with a birthing center. And I found somebody who seemed really aligned here. So we came to meet her earlier in my pregnancy. We toured the city a little bit. We looked around and we kind of felt like, yeah, this is definitely somewhere we could stay for at least 6 months. So we kind of thought, bring our car down. We'll stay for my last trimester and at least the first 3 months of the baby's life. And then if we don't like it, we can move on. And spoiler alert, we really liked it a lot. So we decided to, sign a lease and get into a more permanent situation here. But yeah, I think that things are really similar. If you're American or Canadian, things work differently here, but also really similarly. So the way that of things like buying a car or finding a place to live, like in general, things work pretty similarly and people can help you navigate the differences. Like there's lots of locals that have those services like we've mentioned. So I would say overall, it's been a lot of paperwork, a lot of language learning, definitely some like ups and downs and challenges, but overall quite smooth.
Yeah. And the only things I'd add would be like we used lots of different services, but did find most of our accommodations on our own over like most of the years living here, like using Airbnb and then kind of getting set up, meeting people and going about it that way. But we've never really regretted hiring someone to help us with anything from the immigration stuff to other stuff. So yeah, that's been good. And I think generally too, like, just trust, like, I think coming in, you're like really skeptical of a lot of things. Like, oh, am I going to get scammed here? Whatever. But trusting your gut and kind of like, trusting people, but using discernment has really led us in good directions and to work with people who have been really helpful, whether it was the car, houses, etc. Yeah,
we found a lot of good information through Facebook groups. I feel like most cities we've spent significant time in Mexico have really great like expat or digital nomad groups. And, if you go into like the expat group in Querétaro, for example, and you start looking like who could help me with my residency or who could help me find a house, like the people that we've worked with are the people that are going to be like most recommended. So I feel like you can kind of trust when like hundreds of people in a Facebook group are recommending the same people, you found like good people and they don't want to scam you. Like this is their livelihood. This is their business. They're here to help. They're not looking to like make a quick buck off of you, especially if people are recommending them. So yeah, I feel like use your gut and your judgment, like you said, but I think also like there are really great people out there in all countries around the world that are really genuinely wanting to help you have a good experience.
For sure.
All right. So last question on our list is what's on your travel bucket list and which of these do you think you'll be able to accomplish this year?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I feel like the whole 2020 through 2022 got us off of like thinking what's on our bucket list, what do we want to do, kind of changed our direction and kind of reconnecting with that now. I guess start with like what's on my travel bucket list. I feel like I'm not super clear on this right now. Like what are the things that are on the top of it? Going to every state in Mexico is definitely there. I'd love to go to like some places in like Central Asia, like Mongolia or Kazakhstan or something like that. I think one day I'd love to travel Russia. I would like to go to some like interesting island countries, like go to like the Falkland Islands or go to, some of these random kind of geographic and political isolated things. So all that stuff's kind of still on my bucket list. Probably going to Antarctica is on my bucket list. Spending a summer in Patagonia is on my bucket list. This year, I think...
Well, hey, let me answer the question before you get into what we're doing. Okay, so a lot of those are really similar. I think some other ones, I actually have like an around the world bucket list on my Todoist app. So safari in Africa is something I would love to do. I would love to do some like bigger hikes, maybe like Mount Kilimanjaro, maybe Everest Base Camp. Obviously need to train significantly for those. Going to Bhutan has always been on my bucket list. Places like Madagascar, Easter Island, Jordan, swimming in the Dead Sea. I really want to go to Turkey and do a hot air balloon ride and also see the petrified waterfall there. Seeing the Northern Lights through a glass igloo. I think you can do that in like Finland. That's something that I would love to do. And then I feel like doing the Trans-Siberian Railway. I think that goes through a good portion of Russia. That's something that's definitely on my bucket list. The Maldives are on my bucket list. Going to Antarctica is on my bucket list because that's our last continent. So lots of big things that I would like to do. And I feel like now that we have a little one, I feel really excited to think about giving her these experiences and letting her see the world in this way. So those are mine. Oh, the Egyptian pyramids as well. I would love to see the pyramids in Egypt. So lots of things. I'm sure there's a million more, but those are kind of the top ones that come to mind. So yeah, what of those are we doing this year?
I feel like basically none. I was going to say, I think part of my bucket list seems to be like just going back to the places I've already been and enjoyed. So doing well on that part of it. With like this Japan trip and Colombia. I think that most likely is like making some progress on Mexican states out of my list of things. And then maybe like getting some stuff planned for bigger adventures, kind of like a year from now, maybe a little bit more than a year from now.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just for a little bit of context, so obviously we weren't traveling a ton during my pregnancy and then when Lou was really little. And so as she kind of hit a year, we were like, okay, we're feeling a little bit more comfortable with parenting, a little more stable. We've saved some money. We're ready to do a couple of trips. And I feel like we've been kind of just doing the trips so far that got canceled during the pandemic. So Medellin was one of them. So now we've done that. I feel like we went back to Panama, which felt like we've maybe kind of closed a chapter for now on Panama because we left so quickly. We actually had flights. I don't know if we ever talked about this on the podcast, but we actually had flights to Japan for 2021, I think it was. We booked them at like the end of 2020 thinking this will be amazing. We got a great flight deal. Japan stayed closed. So we are going to Japan for the month of April. I think that we've been really, really keen to get back to Japan since we went there in 2017. And I think taking Lou there is kind of a bucket list item for us. And yeah, we were just talking the other day about what the rest of the year looks like. We've got a big trip to Canada planned in the summer and then not too sure about the fall. I think we're kind of looking at maybe ticking some more states off the list in Mexico. But when the pandemic was happening and we were living here, we were like feeling kind of a bit depressed with all the places we couldn't go. And so we kind of made this sort of big but smaller goal for ourselves of like, hey, could we just explore like a lot of Mexico? And I think one of the beautiful things about living in a country that's so diverse is that there's a lot to see here and there's a lot we still haven't seen. I think we're just a little over half in terms of the states we've been to here. So we've still got a lot of this country to explore and we've got some cool trips planned or on our radar for over the next, I guess, like 6 to 9 months, the rest of 2023. So ticking off a couple more states here. And then we'll have to decide what's aligned on our bucket list and what's most important for us for 2024 and 2025. Where do we want to go?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think like you said, that's a good point is kind of to like reassess the bucket list because some places you've already been are like, I think like you said, taking Lou to Japan would like be like a bucket list thing. And so, especially like as more kids get older, that type of thing. Some of those like adventures we've already done and really loved, and like taking our family to see them, I think will be on there. But yeah, excited to kind of start exploring a little bit wider and farther as time goes on.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just looking at our list and deciding what makes sense in the next couple of years, like I really am keen to do an African safari, but I think they do have a minimum age limit. So that probably won't be something that we do in the next couple of years while we have really small kids. We'll wait till they're a little bit bigger and can come along and enjoy that type of thing. So it'll just be a matter of like, what's a good fit for us in this current chapter of life. And yeah, I was just talking with a friend the other day who was in Vietnam, and I was like, oh, I really want to get back to Vietnam. Like we haven't been there since 2011. That feels like a lifetime ago. And so I would really love to go back there. And so I think that the hard thing, especially now that we have more of a home base, is like we need to be a little choosy about where we go, where we take our bigger trips and stuff like that, and kind of balance exploring new places, taking some things off the list while also there are places we want to go back to and stuff like that. So also doing that stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your questions. Like we said at the beginning, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to send them in and we can do another episode like this. But it's been fun to answer these questions and have this chat. So thank you so much for listening to this episode and sticking with us. And hopefully this has been fun and enjoyable for everyone.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, bye guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wanderers Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.